Good morning, Sarah. How are you doing today? Thanks for joining me.
Morning. Thank you for having me. Yeah, good. How are you?
Yes, good, thanks. Yeah, it's afternoon here in Thailand, but mostly today I'd like to focus on people that are moving to the UK for work. I know this is your area of expertise, but can I get you to introduce yourself a bit and tell people what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Spicer. I'm based in the UK now. I've taught English for many years. In fact, I was teaching in Thailand as well for some time. I came back maybe 2012. But currently, I help people who've come to the UK for work, and I help them to develop their English skills, develop their confidence in using English in the workplace so they can achieve the success that they deserve, basically.
Right. Great. Okay. So I've got some questions for you as well that I'd like to
Mhm.
ask. And the first one is about any tips that you might have for non-native English speakers to improve their language skills, specifically for the workplace.
Yeah, I think for the workplace, the biggest thing that I find when people come from overseas to the UK is being able to use their English to actually communicate. So often we've been studying English at school. Lots of people have a very good knowledge of English. They can pass lots of exams, but it's actually having the confidence to use it. So I would suggest if you're not in the UK yet, finding opportunities to practice speaking and building that confidence in practicing speaking. And this is not necessarily in a business or work context. So even joining communities with expats who've come to your country. I find meetup.com is really good for that. I used to use that when I lived overseas, and it's a great way to meet local people and expats and to practice speaking. And to get into the habit of listening more, listening to podcasts, business related podcasts, of course, is going to help you to develop your business language. But, getting into the habit of just listening to English in general is going to definitely serve you well when you get to the UK. Because most people struggle to understand different people with different accents. So getting into the habit of listening to lots of different people will really help you. And I think if you're in the UK already or you're planning to work, really identifying what you need, how you need to use language. So, in your job role, are you going to have to give presentations? Will you have to write emails? Will you have to participate in meetings, which is probably something that you will have to do? And developing your language around that, even doing, a Google search, phrases to use in meetings, those kind of things can really help you to develop the language that you need when you get to the UK and working in the UK.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, Sarah. Right, I'm just going to do a little. Okay, so now I'd like to ask about the kind of challenges that people face in your experience or what they might expect to face and how can they prepare for them?
Yeah, I think no matter what someone's English level is, there's always going to be challenges when you move to the UK or any other country. And I'd say the first is the language that people actually use. So this is what so many of my clients say, even if they're C1 level, even C2 level, they always tell me, so when I first arrived in the UK, I felt like I didn't know any English because people are speaking with lots of different accents. Obviously, native speakers tend to speak more quickly. There's lots of dialects as well. So, depending on where they are in the UK, people may use different words for things. So, just like between the UK and America, USA, there's different words for things. Actually, different regions in the UK, some different words for things as well. So that can be confusing. And in general, I think native speakers, especially British native speakers, use lots of figurative language. So things like idioms, those little phrases that don't translate, like, think of an example, you hit the nail on the head, or let's play it by ear, which if you translate directly are quite confusing. But British people use these all the time. So that can be really confusing at the beginning. So in terms of that, well, the actual language, so the accents and understanding this figurative language, I think being able to develop your knowledge of that, of local language, of idioms, be able to understand them, not necessarily use them, but at the beginning, being able to understand them. And in terms of accent, listening to British speakers on podcasts, there could be YouTubers out there, or even local radio stations. So say if you know you're going to be living in Manchester, for example, most of the time you can access radio stations online now where you'll be hearing lots of the local language, and it will help to prepare your ear so you're used to these accents before you actually arrive. It'll just give you a little head start before you arrive, because I think most people around the world who are using English, who are learning English, are listening a lot to American English in movies, TV series. So making that switch to the UK, tuning into those accents can be really a difficult thing, first of all. So that's the language. But apart from the language, there's culture as well. Now, culture, there's sort of two aspects to this. You have like the cultural, the expectations of things that how you behave, things that you say in different situations, but also the style of communication as well. So in terms of understanding expectations, it's good to do a bit of research before you go to UK. I've got some good websites out there that can share the link with you. What's expected in meetings, for example. So meetings in the UK, you're expected to contribute and speak and share your ideas and question things to a point as well. So it's okay to question people, so your manager or people in authority. And if this is not the norm in your country, that can be quite confusing or uncomfortable. So being aware of those kind of things will really help to prepare you in the first place. But on the other aspect, and something that a lot of my clients struggle with, is the communication style in the UK. So I work with a lot of people from Poland, Slovakia, where direct communication is the norm. What you say is what you mean. However, in the UK, this is not always the case. Now, in some cases at work, if you're just communicating facts, it's okay to be direct and to say things how they are. However, if you want to ask someone or tell someone to do something, but you think it may be an inconvenience to them or it might upset them in some way, British people tend to use indirect communication style. As I said, I wouldn't say everybody in the UK is like this, but there is that tendency, and it's definitely something to be aware of. So if as an example, say, after this, I want you to send me an email. I don't know. Send me an email with a summary of what we've talked about. That's quite an inconvenience for you. So rather than saying, David, send me the email, I might say, David, would you mind sending me an email after the meeting?
Right.
Now,
But I'm not
this
expected to say, actually, I'd rather not.
exactly. It's a question. It sounds like there's a choice there, right? And this is what my clients have difficulty with because they will refuse and say, oh, no, I don't want to do that.
Mm.
And then the British manager thinks, very impolite.
Mm.
Why have they said that? Why have they refused to do what I've asked them to do?
Right.
And that's where those misunderstandings happen. And even though the intention on my client side was to just be clear and direct, but the intention on the British person side, the manager, was to be polite. But obviously that's misinterpreted, and that's where we have these misunderstandings, which can escalate and become bigger misunderstandings, and that can lead to breakdowns in relationships and all sorts. So yeah, having an understanding of that and an awareness, first of all, can really help you. As I said, not everyone is going to be like that. Not everyone's going to communicate in that way, but just being aware that maybe they will speak like this or communicate, that will give you a head start in understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great,
A lot of
great tip.
information.
Yeah, I think that is a big challenge, but like you say, that awareness can help you, at least your
Yeah.
question, what the intent is. And that's a great, I like your advice about getting the local radio station as well, tuning in. Like you say, nowadays we don't need to be in that physical location. We can
Yeah.
often get it online. Yeah, great
But yeah, they're
points.
the key things that my clients have difficulty with. So best to, deal with them before you actually arrive in the UK and be aware, and can really help you to, adapt more quickly.
Definitely. Thank you. So talking about adapting, the next
Mm-hmm.
question may overlap a little bit, but maybe there's something you can add about how can new arrivals adapt to the local culture and norms, etiquette, ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think doing your research, first of all, is really important. Just being aware of those differences, those expectations, so you know what to expect. But at the same time, not going into situations expecting people to behave in that way. If that makes sense. Because even obviously culture covers a huge thing, and there's different cultures within the British culture as well. And different workplaces have different styles as well. Some workplaces will be more formal and expect more professional attire, for example, clothes that you wear, whereas other workplaces will be different. So I'd say do your research about the culture in general, but also about where you're going to be working as well. And in order to adapt, I think the best way to adapt is to make friends with British people. And I know that's not as easy as it sounds. But when you're open to share about you, and you're able to talk to people and build those relationships, it will help. You can have those conversations about culture, discussing, oh, we do this in my country, oh, it's different, and finding it interesting rather than some kind of barrier there. But tips for making friends with British people,
Yes.
you want as well. But again, I always go back to Meetup because I found it so useful when I lived overseas. But also when I moved back to the UK, I didn't have a huge social circle at all. Many of my friends who were here before I left had moved away, lived in other places. So meetup.com is good to meet local people. I really like hiking in the countryside, so I found a meetup local to me and I met new people. So it could be locals to the area, it could be people from around the UK who've moved to this area, so say around Manchester, for example, but also people from overseas as well. So it's a really nice, relaxed way to meet people because sometimes when you're at work, it feels pressured, whereas it's a nice, relaxed way to meet people, get to know British people, understand the culture, and have some fun while you're doing it as well.
And can you tell me a little bit about Meetup a bit more? Because is it is it all physical meetings where you have a location and a time and you meet a group? Can you give us an idea how it works?
Yeah, originally it was physical meetings. So Sarah would they meet once a month. People can create a group. People join that group online. So it's a website you can join online. And yeah, they just have an event. Say we meet. I live in Macclesfield now, so we'll meet in Cafe Nero in Macclesfield, and just go along. And I think because everybody's in the same situation, people are all going there often by themselves and they're meeting others for the first time. It makes it less intimidating, I think, than breaking into friendship groups that already exist. But anyway, back to your question. Yeah, there's physical meetups, but obviously since the pandemic, these all went online. So there's quite a few online groups as well. A little plug for I have my own online group actually.
Okay, great.
Plugging myself, but it's a free group aimed at expats in the UK or people who want to come to the UK, just so they can meet each other and practice making small talk, having conversations to build their confidence.
And do you host those online or do you also have physical meetup for your group?
At the moment, it's only online because I can't find at the moment enough people close by to me to actually do a physical meetup because in the group we have people who are all over the UK. So at the moment it's online,
Right.
but hopefully in the future I can do face to face. I think we're missing those face to face interactions after how many 3 years of being shut inside. So yeah.
And it's good to have the option. So I think we'll put a link in we'll put it below the video so people can check out your group if they are in the UK looking for something.
It's lovely as well. It's probably the part of my business that I enjoy the most, just because it's so interesting meeting new people in that relaxed atmosphere. So yeah, everyone's welcome.
Great. Nice. Yes, good answers. How important is it? Let's say someone's coming to the UK in a fixed time frame, either a month, 2 months, whatever it is. How important is it to work on improving English proficiency versus something else, cultural knowledge or things that we've talked about already?
It depends what you mean by English proficiency as well, because I think if we're talking about sort of those CFR levels, if it's intermediate, advanced, B1, B2, C1, I think I would aim to get to at least a B2. Really, I think it's important to be at that point because then you've got the proficiency in using the grammar to express yourself clearly. So that's going to help you. Absolutely. So definitely aim for that. But also, it's not about the knowledge of the language, it's being able to communicate. So being able to speak at that level, listen at that level. And I think a big proportion needs to be focused on the language you need in that country. So building your knowledge of the idioms and listening to those different accents, as we talked about before.
Yes, we did talk about idioms, and I just wanted to ask you about those. Should they go and try and learn a big list of idioms or just make a note of them as they come across them? Do you have any tips?
I'm not a massive fan of lists because I think you can easily just go through lists, you learn it, and just to use an idiom here, it goes in one ear and out the other, so you have, again, a knowledge of it, but you're not actually using it. So I'd say a bit of both, maybe, because you don't necessarily come across idioms a lot, but maybe if you're studying on a certain course, there may be a few idioms. Make a note, understand the context of when people use it. So yeah, learn a few, be aware, but then when you come to the UK, then you're more aware of noticing the ones that you hear a lot.
Yeah.
Because sometimes on English courses, I've seen idioms like "it's raining cats and dogs," which is an idiom, but people don't really use it. It's quite old-fashioned, and you wouldn't hear people. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're listening to British speakers on podcasts, YouTubers, you will hear idioms that people actually use. So that's another way. That's another reason to avoid those long lists, because you don't really know the ones that are actually in use.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes, it
So be
does.
aware, learn a few. The ones that like you say, the ones that you come across are probably going to be more useful.
Great. Thank you. And yes, I think you had another point when I interrupted you, but I don't know if you. Oops.
Can't remember now. Oh yeah, proficiency. Another word about proficiency. I think we can get to a point where we're so focused on proficiency and being perfect in English that it stops people from actually communicating. And when we've been doing exams and being tested on our English our whole lives, it's easy to fall into that habit of being worried about making mistakes. And this stops people actually communicating. And being at the other end, this is what I help most of my clients with. It's getting over that fear of making mistakes, because they find, in meetings, they're not saying what they want to say because they're worried that they're going to make a mistake. So it's being okay with that proficiency as well. I'd say if you get to a B2 level, you've got the proficiency. Now it's focusing on communication. How can you communicate clearly rather than worrying about having perfect grammar, for example? And I think when we focus more on clarity as well, this is where the question of pronunciation comes up.
Right.
So that's another thing that I tend to help clients with. And it's an interesting one because people come to me saying, Sarah, my accent's really strong. People don't understand me because of my accent. Whereas I don't think it's necessarily the accent, but it's about having clear pronunciation. So what I want to help clients do is to embrace their accent, be proud of where they're from and their accent from their first language, but focus on certain sounds that are stopping them from expressing themselves clearly. Basically.
Yes, I totally agree. I always say if it's not a barrier to if it's not a barrier to communication, then if it's just an accent, it doesn't matter. It can be quite interesting almost, we quite like to hear a different accent.
Yeah, and when we're talking about making friends, I think it's a good talking point when you have an accent. It's a good way to start conversations, and people find that really interesting. And you're more authentically you as well, and people will like that.
Yes. Great. The next one is about, do you have any tips for non-English speakers to excel in a professional setting?
Yes, as well as building your professional language and being clear on how to communicate the expectations of different situations. I think the key thing is to focus on building relationships. And I say this from my own experience, really. Having been a teacher for many years, the professional environment was quite new to me when I started my business. So I first started a business in 2015, and we were working with businesses, so British businesses who had staff from overseas. So suddenly I went from being a teacher to having to go to networking events and be professional and have business meetings, which was very uncomfortable for me at first. And I put on this sort of facade of being professional and being very polite. But I didn't let my personality come through. And I think sometimes if you seem very professional, you seem quite cold as well. And what's really at the core is being able to build those relationships. And as soon as I allowed that sort of professional facade to go and to, be more myself and share things about myself, not too personal. So
Right.
are you going to say something?
Yes, no, I was just thinking, yeah, this, as you mentioned, this facade or this kind of outward appearance of being, totally professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that then acts as a barrier, and where people aren't making the connections, whether that's with their colleagues or even with clients. Now, of course, you need to use some professional language. You're not going to speak to a client in the same way that you speak to your best friend. But at the same time, being able to express how you are. And that's another reason why I think accent, it's okay. It's good to embrace your accent because you are more authentic and you're able to build those relationships. So I would say focus from job interviews, focus on those relationships when you're having that interview at the beginning, being able to build rapport with people is going to help you. Being able to build relationships, like I say, with colleagues, with clients, with people in your local community, all of these things are going to help you. So in your everyday life, but also a professional context as well.
Yes, thank you. I like that advice. How about mistakes that people should look out for? Maybe there are certain, as they might say in France, faux pas or mistakes or common errors that you see people committing or doing. You see people making these mistakes, or you hear about your client stories where they did XYZ and they feel terrible. They made such a mistake. Can you share some of these and perhaps ways to prevent them in the first place?
The story that I hear so often by my clients is this direct, indirect language.
Right.
So people being too direct or appearing rude. I think that's probably the first thing. So even in an email, just being very direct, just saying what you want. There's no like friendly introduction at the beginning or anything at the end, just maybe one sentence. And this can seem very, very rude and impolite, particularly if you don't know that person very well. Obviously, when you're sending emails within a company and you know your colleagues well, it would be more like one line. But to a client, this can seem very rude. But then on a similar sort of theme there, you can go all the way to the other end and be too polite. As I said about being too professional, but in email writing as well, many people on traditional English courses at school learn how to write formal letters. And then they apply this to written emails, which just feels just too formal and too impersonal. So it's finding that balance in between, really. You don't want to be too direct, but at the same time, you don't want to be too impersonal that you seem like a robot and not a human being. Yeah.
Right.
And I think the mindset as well, I would say, of people feeling like they need to prove their English. So speaking quickly. So many people tell me, oh, if I speak slowly or if I pause a lot, I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm talking about. But if you speak very quickly, you're less clear. And actually, if you look at people who communicate very well and actually are really good speakers, they tend to speak more slowly, have pauses, and allow people time to process what they're saying. So yeah, fluency doesn't equal speed.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a big thing. People trying to prove that their English is good enough by speaking quickly. Definitely
Yeah,
not the
that's
case.
an interesting point. And I definitely agree about the clarity. I think I saw a post just the other day where people were saying in other languages and cultures, maybe in the in the Mediterranean area, speaking quickly can be a sign that you're very fluent and you're capable, that you have a
Mm,
strong command of the language. But it might just come across that you are nervous. And like you said, there's more chance that people will misunderstand what you say.
yeah, absolutely. So if you keep the clarity in mind over do I sound good enough, being clear is totally more important.
Yes, thank you.
Hopefully, I'm being clear.
Yes, Crystal. So I've got one more question for you today, and then perhaps you have some questions. What advice can you give to people who may feel intimidated in this professional setting? We talked about mistakes before. Maybe they've made a mistake, or maybe somebody's made them feel that they're
Mm,
not up to the task, they're not good enough in some way. Do you have any advice you can share?
yeah. So I think with this one is just acknowledge how well you've done to get to where you are already. You're working in a second language, a third language, maybe even a fourth language. And that is a huge achievement. And also, if you're in the UK, you're working in a completely different country, in a different culture. So give yourself credit. And at the same time, acknowledge that actually your colleagues, your British colleagues, it's very likely that they don't speak a second language either. In the UK, it's not, I think in schools now, it's not even compulsory to take a language. I think you can drop a foreign language. So lots of British people don't speak a second language. So if anyone's made you feel not good enough, don't necessarily say, well, you don't speak a second language, but just be confident in yourself that you were doing something great. So I'd say that first of all. And to take their criticism, I'm going to use an idiom then, take it with a pinch of salt.
Right. With a
They might
so,
not necessarily be true, but although they might be highlighting that you're not being clear, so you can think about that, I suppose. But give yourself credit for how far you've come. And I would say shift that focus from you onto other people. So in a professional setting, if you're working with clients, rather than feeling like, well, they're judging me because of my English, what will they think if I make a mistake? Focus on how can you help them? Because you are the expert. You've got that job because you're an expert in your field and what you actually do. You're not there to prove your English skills. You're there to use your expertise and to help that client, for example. So yeah, I'll give you an example with it. I've worked with a team recently native speakers and non-native speakers, a team of engineers who had to give presentations to their clients, so updating them on site visits and report. But ultimately, they had to persuade them to make the changes. But when I spoke to everyone, so this is native speakers and non-native speakers, so non-native speakers and native speakers, so British people, and they all had those same thoughts. What are they thinking about me? Maybe they think I'm not good enough. Whereas when we shift the perspective of, okay, how can I help them? Maybe they ask a question and you don't know the answer to that. That's okay. You can just say, I will find out for you. I don't know, but I will do my best to find out and help you. And when you've got that helping mindset, the focus is on them and not on you and your mistakes. It not only makes them feel looked after and cared for, and you're taking care of them as a client, but you're less worried about mistakes as well.
Yeah, it takes the focus off you, maybe the emphasis. Yeah, great.
And I think as well, we misinterpret things. So if a client says, could you repeat that? I think if you've learned the language, sometimes you think, oh, my English isn't good enough. They've asked me to repeat myself. It must have been I've made a mistake. It's terrible. And it might not be that. It could be so many other reasons that they just weren't listening, or they were distracted, or it is a complex subject that they don't know about. They don't understand these engineering terms or whatever your field of expertise is. So focusing on just explaining it clearly is more important than thinking, oh, it must be my English isn't good enough. I think that's a habit that people get into that really knocks your confidence.
Yes. Wow. Thank you very much for excellent advice and tips and insight. Yeah,
Thank you.
really, really good to talk to you. So I just wonder if anyone, how can we get hold of you if we're coming to the UK and think someone wants to work with you or just to get in touch to say hello? We're going to put in the link for your meetup.com. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with watchers?
Yeah, well, I'll share a link to my website. So that's got details of the one-to-one coaching that I do and my online courses that are coming in the near future as well. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook. So I have a community on Facebook as well, which is related to my meetup. It's called the English Cafe. So it'd be great for you to join that. But I'll excuse me, I'll
People
share
have to
those.
be in the UK? Is it exclusively for people in the UK?
Not exclusively. However, it is more focused on the language and the culture. So I think it's probably more relevant to people who have that plan to come to the UK. Either you're here already or you plan to come in the future. I think it would be more beneficial to those people because British English is not the English that the rest of the world uses. So if you have plans to go to USA or even use English in your country as well, in an international setting, it's quite different. So yeah, really focused on people who want to develop their career or start a business even in the UK.
Great. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much. And look forward to keeping
Okay, welcome.
updates with everything you're
Thank you
doing.
for having me.